Well, hello everybody. Kia ora koutou. A big welcome to all of you who are out there on Facebook or YouTube or wherever you are tuning in to have a meeting with Raf Manji, the leader of the Opportunities Party. I'm Ben Wylie-van Eerd. I'm a top member and candidate from the Hutt South election, from the Hutt South electorate, sorry, and I'll be feeding through to Raf all of your questions today, and hopefully we'll have a really good conversation today.
Yeah, hey Ben.
So, fantastic, thank you. So
How
you've been doing a lot of traveling, Raf, around the country lately. Where are you coming to us from today?
Today I'm at home in Wellington, in Taiado, in my apartment. Yep, just hanging out.
Good to be back. Little rest before you go off to your next place.
Yeah, I mean it was good getting up to Auckland, seeing people there, and then spending a week down in Christchurch. Well, 10 days ago now, and particularly catching up with old friends in Christchurch. Yeah, and just good getting out talking to people as well. There's a lot on people's minds at the moment. I attended a public meeting as well on Three Waters, which was really interesting in my old electorate of Ireland. And yeah, that's the fun bit of the job, I think, getting out and talking to people.
I'm sure we'll get into the Three Waters stuff at some point today. Do you find when you travel around the country, do you find people have different concerns the different places you go, or are you hearing the same kind of stories?
Look, I think there are some similar issues. Obviously, the the recovery from COVID, the cost of living crisis, but essentially, the price squeeze, the supply squeeze, that sort of general uncertainty that people are feeling. There's a couple of specific areas. I mean, mental health continues to be a problem and challenge for a lot of people, and accessing services as well. But generally, people are concerned about where things are at, and we're in a period of uncertainty and instability. And a lot of people are still dealing with COVID and the outcomes from that. And it's quite astonishing, really, when you think of all the efforts that went into, preventing any deaths at all. I mean, we're still seeing, 15, 20, 30 people a day are actually still dying from COVID. And it's almost like it's dropped off the agenda, which is quite strange. But yeah, I feel people are a bit low on energy and are looking forward to something different, really.
Oh, good for them. Then we've got some fresh ideas and different ways we can change the country and shake things up, eh?
Yeah, I mean it's very exciting when we talk about tax. People are struggling, particularly on lower incomes, and that's an area we're very focused on in terms of our tax switch. Trying to support incomes, whether it's through a UBI or a tax-free threshold, or however we do it. We want to support people on lower incomes, and I think that's a key issue for many people.
Yeah, for sure. It does make a huge difference at the end of the day. Shall we get to a question then?
Sure, that's what we're here for.
All right, let's bring one up. What have we got? So, what do you make of the recent News Hub political poll? Came out just yesterday, I understand, and it had a pretty good result for top, I think.
I think the News Hub one wasn't, but the Roy Morgan one was.
I beg your pardon.
The pollsters, the Roy Morgan one is one they pay a bit more attention to these days. But I mean, look, I think we were 2% in the Roy Morgan, and we've been between 1% and 2% for a long time now. And that's just kind of where our base is. And you have to remember, when people are polled, they're asked a question: who would you support in the next election? Which party would you support? As opposed to getting a list of parties. So often, top is not coming to mind straight away for a lot of people. So it's like Labour or National, Greens or ACT. And that's generally what we see. So it doesn't surprise me that our polling is not quite there yet. And that's something obviously we'd like to improve over time, and we will do that with a bit more profile. I mean, there's no doubt that there's been a huge swing from the 2020 election result. Labour down probably 12, 15 points from that result. Yeah. And in a way, that's good for top, because all the focus now is going to be back in the centre and who can be the support parties. Because essentially, we've got two blocks: it's Labour Green or National ACT. And Te Pāti Māori is in the middle. Maybe not in the middle politically, but it's certainly there as a potential support partner. And then we have top as another option. And our job is to make sure that people know, when it comes to the election in 2023, that we're a solid option.
Definitely. All right. Can we have another question, please? Hi, Raf. What's your plan to prevent being falsely labelled as a communist, extreme leftist, etc., by those with vested interests against top policy? How do you stop the existing stereotypes costing you votes? Thoughts?
Actually, I've never been called a communist before, but actually, no, I was once. An American colleague, he came over from New York, and he was visiting a trading floor I was working on in London. And I had happened to have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights poster up on the wall behind my desk. It must have been 1998 because it was the 50th anniversary. And he said, "Are you a communist or something?" And, you know, because the Americans like the idea of human rights is a bit lifted for them. And I said, "Oh, you do realize it was Eleanor Roosevelt who actually drove the creation of the UDHR, but you know that's a different story." Look, I think,
Did you realise?
yeah, I mean, I think, Top quite clearly is a progressive party. It's liberal, but we're pretty centrist. I mean, we're about solving problems. And if you think traditionally, I mean, the late 19th century in New Zealand, the Liberal Party was not dissimilar to Top. It was focused on improving welfare, infrastructure development, breaking up the big landholders. You know, it was focused on essentially creating a fairer platform. So I think, unfortunately, Liberals have tended to go right in some respects, but I think the stereotype of left or right, that's kind of not where we are. We're in the middle, but really trying to go forward. And we might be going forward a bit to the left and a bit to the right sometimes, but essentially we're going forward. And I think we just have to keep talking about that. And people can call us whatever they like, but I think when people stop and see what we're doing and the approach that we're taking, is we can talk to people from the left or the right, because our goal is trying to create a fairer system and opportunities for all.
Great answer. I sort of tend to agree. I think doesn't matter what you do, people are going to call you things sometimes. You have to make sure that you're presenting people with something that's attractive to them. They can say, "Oh, I can understand what he's saying. I know, I feel these kinds of issues in my life, and actually I am concerned about them."
And I think, when you think about, let's say, a UBI, some people think that is, a communist plot and a route to some kind of social credit system. Whereas I actually see it as the path to freedom, in that it frees people up to do whatever they want. It's about actually making sure people have enough income at a basic level so that they can do the things they want to do. And that's completely the opposite, if you like, to the idea of communism. So I think, we just have to keep talking about this stuff. But I think, with the, there are issues around incomes now, but when we look at some of the technological shifts coming and the squeeze on incomes that will probably come then that changes the conversation very much so.
Yeah. All right. What's our next question? Let's have a look. Do you think you have enough quality candidates to get over the 5% hurdle and convince New Zealand that they are not wasting their vote?
Yeah, I mean, there's two, probably three questions there. So, do we have enough quality candidates? Absolutely. Look at Ben is here representing Hutt South. We do. We have some great candidates, and I can assure you there are a lot of people getting in touch who are interested in being part of Top. A lot of people on the policy development side, and a lot of people who are interested in being a candidate. And there's no doubt being a candidate these days is challenging. Social media, the exposure, as the person before mentioned, you get, it's quite, it can be quite a testing place to be. But we want good candidates, and we want candidates from everywhere. I'm not really worried about where they're coming from. It's do they want to create a fairer system, and do they have something to offer as well? I mean, in terms of the 5% hurdle, I would say it is a high hurdle. We will be having a go at a few electorates as well. Obviously, it's Jessica in Ohio, Ben obviously Hutt South. We've got Ben in Dunedin, and we've got other people around. And of course, I will probably run somewhere too as well. And I think on the wasted,
wait to find out where.
Yes, on the wasted vote thing, I think it's really important that people vote for what they think is the best, outcome for the country. And obviously, MMP, requires some kind of strategic voting. And unfortunately, the 5% threshold is very, essentially anti-democratic, because it doesn't allow people to express their views. If the threshold was, 3% or even 1%. People would then vote with, commitment to what they believed in and supported. So yeah, I think we can address those things. And I'd say to people, it's not a wasted vote because you're sending a signal, and sometimes change takes a bit of time. I hope that this time in the 2023 election, it will be Top's time. So get involved, support Top. It's not a wasted vote.
Absolutely not. I often think about this, and I think one of the things I've come to is that there's 100 different ways you can waste your vote. And if what you want is change in the way that the country's running, then it's absolutely a wasted vote to be voting for these establishment parties that are not going to do it and have a deep commitment to keeping the country going the way it's going.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, you could say you could vote Green or ACT. That's as much as a wasted vote because they're actually not going to have that much influence. Look at the Greens; they've not been able to have that much influence on the government around the big stuff. So yeah,
climate change for one.
Well, yeah.
Okay, time for a new question. I think. What have we got? At what point can we expect to hear more about the policies that Top are going to bring forth before the next election? So a few people have been asking us this.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's an interesting question because there's no right or wrong way. I think we would obviously we're spending a lot of time on the tax switch because that's a big number crunching exercise, and actually data because of COVID, a lot of data has been delayed, particularly around tax and income statistics. But we're spending a bit of time on that. But we're also thinking about other policies, particularly in the environmental space. What are we going to do about the emissions trading scheme? Are we going to have a reducing cap? How are we going to deal with the forests and carbon offsets? And, I think there are some issues that we would like to take a bit more time to think about. Doesn't mean the policies will radically change from 2020, because I think the policy set was pretty good. But you need to update. Things change in 2 or 3 years. So I would hope we would have the main course ready, probably by September, October. And obviously, we want to have some policies to announce next year as well. Some of the more interesting, some of the more out of the box policies might come next year. But no, we're working on that. And what I'm really pleased about is how many, policy specialists are, getting in touch, saying they'd like to get involved with policy development, which is really great because it's their opportunity, to put forward new ideas. We're not. We're not bound to anything in particular. It's really what is going to work and looking at the research that supports those policies.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? All right, next question, please. Hi, Raf. If you had been in charge of the current government, what would have been your stance on the current Russia-Ukraine conflict? And would you have done anything differently than what Labour did?
Good question. Look, I mean, probably not. You can slice and dice these things in terms of, timing. I think the sanctions could have been imposed a lot quicker. And obviously the autonomous sanctions bill has been lurking around for some time. And I think we could have been onto that a little bit quicker. We probably should have expelled the Russian ambassador a lot quicker as well. But I think, look, in general, I think we've done okay. I mean, we're the other side of the world. I mean, our job really is to support our allies, support our European allies as well. So yeah, I don't think I would have done things too differently in terms of we've got to the sanctions bit. We're sending some, supplies. But if you think, I mean, the Germans just increased defense spending by 100 billion euros. So they're the ones next door. So Europe, this is actually an issue for Europe, and we just need to make sure we're supporting them and doing everything that we can in international fora to support the Ukrainian people as well.
Yeah, I do remember hearing around the beginning of this conflict, there was criticism about that autonomous sanctions bill, that Labour weren't taking it forwards because it had been originally a National Party proposition. Do you think there's any truth to that? Is this part of the partisanship in our current Parliament at work?
Yeah, I think there is truth to that. I mean, unfortunately, that is how these parties do work, and Labour is particularly bad at it. They're extremely tribal. And they should have just immediately gone, let's get this thing through. you know, this is why we should have had this bill. And yes, we can make it particular to Russia, so we're not opening up ourselves to, you know, trying to impose sanctions on everyone who we don't like for some reason. And yes, I think they dragged their feet a bit. So if you think about what would we have done differently, we would have supported a much quicker response. So that's a speed issue. And it's, yeah, it sends the right message as well. But yeah, I think, you know, if Labour delayed that because it was a national idea, well, that's kind of ridiculous. And that is the approach that we won't take. We will take the approach of always working with people if there's good policy to be delivered, and it doesn't matter if they get the credit, you know.
Yeah, I think that's a really good attitude to take. At the end of the day, everyone elected to Parliament should theoretically be there because they're interested in cooperating to run the country, to run the government in the best way possible.
Yeah,
So
totally.
there's got to be that shared cause. All right, next question, please. Can you explain what Three Waters actually is in a nutshell? I'm going to time you, Raf. I'm going to give you
In a
90
nutshell,
seconds. Are you ready for this?
local government has underinvested in Three Waters infrastructure for a very, very long time. So that is basically your sewerage, your clean water, your drinking water, and your stormwater. Now, the reason they've done that is essentially the local government funding system doesn't support long-term decisions. So that's a problem. So that's it in a nutshell. So what the government did after Havelock North is they looked at the system and they decided, with the help of lots of consultants who are going to make shed loads of money out of this, to completely rewire the system. And there's two bits to it. One is the water regulator. So I think everyone agrees having a water regulator at a central level is a good idea. Now, of course, we've always had water safety officers and systems because they do go around and audit councils all the time. But let's say a national water regulator is fine. Then the main issue is funding. So the problem is smaller councils with lower rating bases, they just can't raise the money to provide the level of service that a lot of people would like. So the easiest way for that to be dealt with is the central government to supply the funding. Now they do this already through Crown Infrastructure Partners, which basically doles out cash to councils who are struggling with their water infrastructure management. Councils like Auckland, Christchurch, they're big, they've got much bigger balance sheets. They can take this work on at a different level. And so what the government has done, and I think, you know, and I'll say quite clearly, I was in the first meeting they had with Christchurch City Council, DIA came down, and it was clear when they showed us the documentation, they already had that sort of split entity model developed. So they didn't come down and say, hey, you guys had a massive earthquake and you spent nearly $3 billion replacing your horizontal infrastructure. Any ideas? What do you think we could do? We would have told them exactly, well, this is our experience with the Skirt Alliance. This is our, let's say, feedback. Here's the, you know, ways we could have done things a little bit better. And here's the learnings and all the rest of it. And all that stuff is there. So that all that information is there, which they've chosen to ignore. And essentially, I think they wanted to do what we call, they put form before function. So they decided on the form they wanted, which was essentially these four entities, as opposed to how do we solve the underinvestment in Three Waters infrastructure. Now, if you think how we fund roads in the country, you know, we have a national road transport plan. We have a fund which comes out to local authorities to support roading. Again, water's the same thing. It's just a bunch of pipes. So it would have been so much more efficient for central government to set up a fund, ask councils to submit their projects, prioritize those projects, and deliver the money to do them. It's going to be the same pipes and the same people who actually put these pipes in the ground. Right. So what focus so much on the entities and then the governance of the entities that it's just caused absolute mayhem, and it's been completely unnecessary. And they've spent fortunes because they could have been doing this work in the last 4 or 5 years. And so, yeah, it's no wonder people are somewhat exercised by it. And of course, yeah, we still need to solve the problem, but I just think it could have been done in a much simpler way. Yeah. So hopefully that explains it. Yeah.
Maybe you can just follow up on that and saying a couple of the things that TOP would do in approaching our water infrastructure. How would we do things differently, Raf?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would use Crown Infrastructure Partners as a funding model. Every council and anyone who's sat on a council or been involved in council planning knows that councils these days have to have 30-year infrastructure plans. So every council in the country has got a 30-year plan which lists all the infrastructure projects. Now, some of them have been designed, some of them have been planned, some of them are just sitting there as a, we hope we're going to do this at some point in the future, and there's a rough budget attached to it. So all that information is there. So we would just call for councils to bring those forward, and actually we would set out a national 30-year Three Waters infrastructure plan. And you can do so many good things with that, and you don't need the entity stuff. And actually what you do is you look at local government and say, what's the future of local government? And then when you decide that, then you might find that things change in terms of structure. But the model they've come up with is just, I'm incredulous, really, at what they've ended up with. It makes no sense at all.
Right. Yeah. Well, on to a new topic. What have we got?
I'm going to have some water, actually.
Not a trouble. Not a trouble at all. I did some while you were speaking, so it must be your turn. Hi, Raf. Which demographic do you believe the votes will come from in order for Top to get into Parliament?
Yeah, I would say primarily, I mean, look, I'm just, picking a number, but probably under 40, under 35. Young people should be voting for Top, absolutely, without a second thought. We will have great environmental policies. We'll have policies that are focused on the future. We will deal with the housing issue. That's not to say that older generations are interested too. I know a lot of people, particularly when I was down in Christchurch, they're worried about their children and they're worried about their grandchildren. So they're kind of getting it in the neck the whole time. Yeah. And this is why we've got, I think there were some numbers out recently showing, looking at bank mortgage lending. And I'm not 100% sure this is completely accurate, but I think the bank of mum and dad was like about $22 billion. So people, I mean, that's nuts. I mean, that's essentially an inheritance tax, but only on people who have the money. Your parents are not well off. They've got no bank to access. I mean, it's just everywhere we see that the lack of taxation on essentially land price growth is damaging the country so much. So I think, our pitch will be to younger people, like, you're going to inherit this mess. So get your hands on the reins now and make the changes. So that's where we will be targeting.
I like that pitch.
But in a positive way, if we're going to go forward. And I think the older generations will, some of them won't like it, but a lot of them will go, yep, you're probably right. And house prices are up 545% in the last 20 years. And we're saying, okay, we're going to have a 1% annual land tax on land value. It's like people might squeal and then you go, oh, actually, there is a lot of unearned wealth sitting there in land. So I think if younger people, I think if they want to get serious, they've got to get into power and they've got to actually affect change. So that's probably the demographic we'll be focusing on.
Fantastic. Any other ones you want to give a shout out to just before we move on?
Who, me?
Yeah.
So say that again?
Any other demographics you want to give a shout out to before we move on?
I think, when I look at the tax policy, particularly with the large income tax cuts that we're proposing, probably 70% of people will be better off under Top. So basically anyone earning 80,000 or under, vote Top.
All right. Next question, please. How would Top address the rise in youth offending? For example, the rise in ram raids if it wants to raise the age of youth court to 20?
Yeah. This is a really difficult issue. And unfortunately, there isn't an easy answer. The police tend to say it's quite a small group of people. This is not kind of like a nationwide problem amongst young people. But essentially, this is an outcome of years of underinvestment in, schooling, in post-school training, in proper incomes for people, in decent housing, in communities that are safe and have got safe places to be. And yeah, I mean, look, depending on your view of crime, you might think it's just part of society and there'll always be, 1% of deviancy, regardless of what you do. But it does feel like things are, getting out of hand. The stresses in the system, and I should declare that last year I sat on the police commissioner's assurance and risk committee, just helping out with strategy and, belts and braces, audit and risk stuff. And I had a pretty decent look at what the police are facing and some of the statistics. And, the call, if you look at the annual report from the police last year, the number of calls they're receiving to the 105 line, which is like the non kind of emergency, it's just astronomical. I mean, it's going up like 20-30% a year. Now, what that is telling is that there are enormous social stresses across society. Now, they might be in certain pockets in low income areas, but they're there. And in a way, what we see with this ram raid stuff, I mean, I don't know how to address that, quite frankly. That obviously needs some kind of specialist police response. But it's, unfortunately, this is an outcome of years of, marginalized communities and people getting into criminal pathways because the other pathways have not been there for them.
Yeah.
It's a huge issue. I would be making sure, no kid is leaving school without some kind of pathway in front of them. I mean, that's it. And you've got to put resources into that. I mean, there are, I can tell you anecdotally, a number of, say, year 12s not going back to school this year because of COVID and having to be at home and look after the home and bring some money in. Students not going back to university again, and it's all essentially financial issues and stresses at home. Now, for a lot of people, they don't have those stresses, so they don't see it, and it's not in their face, and they read about it in the paper because there's been some, crime committed. So we've all got to solve this because nobody wants this level of crime. And for those small business owners, it's pretty terrible. A lot of them are, work incredibly hard. They put a lot of their savings into this, and then someone comes and smashes up their shop. I mean, that's pretty bad. So it requires some, serious investment.
Yeah, no, it's heartbreaking stuff. But I really hear what you're saying about the need for a path forwards that is, they can look forwards to a future where they are contributing to society and having their needs met.
And I think, well, if you look at our general approach when we look at things like education, health, housing, it's all about prevention. It's invest up front. So for example, with children, I was reading stories about mental health for postnatal for mothers being really poor. Antenatal issues are being raised with me around the cost of antenatal scans. We've got to invest there because if it goes wrong in the first 5 years, you've got real problems down the line. And then again, if it goes wrong when kids are teenagers, you've got problems again. And if we don't make the investments there, then we've got problems. And you have a government that just sits back and is not interested in changing the tax system to maybe find a little bit more funding to support people in their daily lives. It's just,
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. It's really heartbreaking to look at. And some of the crime and prison stuff that we have in this country, the statistics that we have, they keep me up at night. They do. So it's really,
it's
really good to see people focusing on the causes and the drivers of these kinds of things and how we can offer people a life which doesn't go in that direction, a life which goes in a better direction.
Yeah, I mean, I spent 6 years working with Pillars, which looks after children of prisoners. And, it's a real eye-opener. When you go to a home where there is a child who has a parent in prison, they're behind the 8 ball a long, long way. They're 7 to 8 times more likely to end up in jail. The pathway into a gang is really simple. you know. And if you don't put the effort in, and that's why, you know, the work that Pillars does is fantastic, because it supports those children. And it supports them not just in a mentoring way, but with social workers, wraparound services. And I've seen that the real life outcomes, it makes a difference. So you've got to invest in people, you know.
Seems to be just one more thing that this government is looking at, where it's like, wow, this is getting great results. Can we have more money to expand this program? No, I don't think so. I'm too scared of being seen as a party of wasteful spending, even when you've got studies which show just how tremendously useful the spending really is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they waste a lot of money on stuff which really doesn't help people's basic outcomes, you know, and they don't fund the stuff which is really gritty, but which people really need, and which is going to help deal with some of these issues we're talking about.
All right, it's time to move on. Next question, please. In the past, COP has spoken in quite negative terms about ACT. Does that mean you would struggle to work with the ACT national bloc?
Look, I mean, I think, you know, I mean, we try to be positive, but, you know, occasionally you've got to sort of call people out. We'll work with anyone. I mean, our job is to be in Parliament, represent the community, try and get a fairer system. And there's lots of ways you can do that. So, but in terms of working with other parties, yeah, I mean, if it's good, I mean, look at the end of life bill, you know, great stuff. You know, there are aspects of ACT which are very positive around liberal views and liberal approaches to people's lives. And absolutely, we would support that. I think, you know, some of their shift into that kind of slightly alt-right world is not something we would support. And their kind of lack of interest in investing in people is not something we would support. But we will work with anyone in a collaborative way to get good outcomes. And we will try and persuade people as well when we think they're perhaps not taking the right line. We will not get in a slanging match with people particularly, because I don't think that's helpful. You know, I mean, the whole parliamentary structure, quite frankly, you know, if you ask me, is that going to be around in 30 years? I doubt it. I doubt it. I mean, the world is changing so much, and we've got this kind of 17th century Westminster style system where people, you know, still get up and shout at each other, and the nonsense in Parliament with the Speaker. I mean, it's just silly stuff. The world has moved on.
God, it really is. I don't know how many of you people out there have watched Parliament TV of an occasion, but good Lord.
Yeah, I mean, if that is supposed to be delivering outcomes, positive outcomes to the people, well, you know, they need to get a grip. It's a bit of a farce, and I think over time that will change. And so I think when we talk about a democracy reset, it's actually the people who essentially give that power, that sovereignty through Parliament to be governed. You know, I mean, yes, we have a kind of, you know, constitutional structure which still has the Queen as head of state, which also is faintly ludicrous. But, you know, over time, I think that's going to change. And yeah, as much as conservatives like it, because it tends to work okay, I think at some point people will go, well, hold on a sec, is this really delivering great outcomes for everyone? Or is it just benefiting the few who have access to power, access to capital, access to influence? And we've been watching this Parliament thing, it looks really silly, you know. Does the Prime Minister stand by all her statements and whatever? It's like they just want sound bites for the 6 o'clock news. Well, that's a waste of time. It's a waste of everyone's time, and it costs a lot of money.
It sure does. Yeah, I very much agree with that. One of my favorite things about TOP is that we really do want to change the way we're making decisions in this country. That it's not such an oppositional thing. That it's not such a combative thing. Where, you know, we're serious people. We have serious views, and we recognize that other people have equally serious views. And then you've got to find a way to find good outcomes for everybody.
Yeah, and sometimes
by slinging mud and having shouting matches.
Yeah, and sometimes find middle ground with people as well. You know, what can we find that we agree on? And there'll always be some things that people just will not agree on. People have very fixed views on stuff, and that's fine.
Right.
But
you don't need to spend too much time on it, do you? You just, as you say, you're looking for the agreement, because there are a lot of things where a lot of the New Zealand public they're really in favor of them, and we're still not doing it. That's a failure of our parliamentary system. Yeah. Okay. Another question, please. We're on a roll. This is good stuff. What will Trump's policy on China be? Will we face up to the threat of political interference and China's encroachment into the Pacific?
Yeah, I mean, two questions there. Thank you, Francesca. Look, I think policy, I mean, China's a big trading partner of us, the biggest, and we want to keep trading with them. And that's, we've got a long relationship with China, which has generally been pretty good. So I think we certainly want to keep that. In terms of the, let's say, the geopolitical aspects, well, I think both Australia and New Zealand have been pretty slack about their approach to the Pacific. I mean, I think one good thing Winston did in the previous government was, invest a bit more money in the Pacific, so the Pacific reset. I think the US has taken their eye off the ball there as well, and the Pacific really should be supported by Australia, the US, New Zealand. Obviously, the French have an interest, and well, the British have a vague interest because of the mutiny. But I think we've been, again, quite transactional and quite patriarchal to the Pacific. And the Pacific is saying, well, get stuffed. It's like there's a big shift geopolitically and in the international relations sphere for countries that were colonized previously, have gone through a decolonization process, and they want their independence. They want their self-determination. And if China's been a lot smarter at engaging with those countries, showing them the money and the investment, well, then we've done a bad job. And actually, I remember saying, it was actually at the 15th of March Remembrance Service. I think it was a week or 2 weeks after the shootings. And there was a big sort of diplomatic contingent, and Scott Morrison came over for it. And I had a brief chat to him. I said, thanks for coming, blah, blah, blah. And I said, we really need you guys back in the international relations space, because I think Australia had gone very quiet. And he sort of looked at me like jumped out of his skin a little bit. I said, it's really important. So I think if you look at Australia and the amount of effort they put into the relationship with India, for example, they've been sending ministers up there non-stop for the last 3 or 4 years, and they built a great relationship. Now they have a free trade process going on there. New Zealand's been very transactional. It's like, can we sell you, a bag of dairy powder? We've got to get a lot smarter than the way we approach, our trade particularly. So I think, to just wrap up on the Pacific, we've got to have a very strong allied position in the Pacific with our allies, whether it's formal or informal. And obviously Australia, the US, France, the UK, Japan as well, and New Zealand all have to do our bit. And I think we just have to be very firm. We don't have to sort of scream and shout, but we have to say, this is our backwater. Or I think actually the new term is, this is our neighborhood. This is our neighborhood. And I like that, and I think, we have to stop taking the Pacific Islands for granted and actually start listening to them as they kind of express their needs. Those colonial attitudes are gone. And I think sometimes we still act as if they're around, but they're not. And the world is changing. And actually India, in terms of their foreign policy, even in the last couple of months, has been a huge shift in terms of Ukraine, because India is a huge country. It doesn't need New Zealand. It's always been reasonably non-aligned, but it's expressing itself in a very different way. So there are some, tectonic shifts going on in international relationships. And New Zealand has to be aware of those. So I hope that answers your question, Francesca, but it's going to be an ongoing discussion and something we do need to be alert to.
Sort of seems to me like there's this maturity gap in the parliament, which sort of echoes in a way the way we do our dealings with other countries at the moment. It's a little bit, I've got mine, are you getting yours, rather than, as you say, a relationship building exercise, which it really should be. These are peoples and populations that we want to have closer relationships with at the end of the day.
Yep.
Next question, please. How do we get past the old Gareth image issues for top? It's my most common response from people.
I don't know, Maggie. Have you got any suggestions? I don't know. I mean, I get asked these sorts of questions quite a lot, and actually, my answer is, well, I don't know. That's how people feel. That's how people feel, and I think often it can sometimes be a generation thing. The older generations tend to remember Gareth a lot more because of the cat business. I like cats. I was at a neighbour's place last night, and there's a cat there, Puffin. Hi, Puffin, downstairs. And I'm a bit allergic to cats, but no, I think, look, it's just the way it is. You just got to kind of move on. Gareth founded Top. You know, we should all be grateful for that. And he's not part of it now, and we're just moving on. And you know, I'll put up some images of myself if that's what you want. But you know.
I would love to see an image of you on a billboard that big.
Yes, yes, we'll see. Yeah, I think we just, you know, there's no point kind of denying that this is not, you know, something that for some people that's the first thing they think of when they think of Top, and that's fine. You go, yep, Gareth founded it. He's not involved anymore. This is the new team, and you know, move on.
Yeah, it's a bit of a quantity thing too, isn't it? Like we just have to give people more impressions of Top as it is now, to give them something to replace it with, I think, in their heads.
Yeah, look, it's a little bit like, I mean, how often do you hear John Key being talked about? I mean, all the time. I mean, it must drive Christopher Luxon crazy, but it's just, that's just how people reference things, you know, and remember things. So it's, yeah, it's just how people are. I wouldn't worry about it too much. When it comes to the business end of things in September 2023, we'll be full bore.
We sure will. All right, quick commercial break here, which is to say I'm going to encourage all of you to go over to our website. That's www.top.org.nz/comms. You can sign up there. You can find out what Top's been up to in the news, and you can become a member. We're going to need lots and lots of people just like you to become members, become supporters, if we're going to drive the change that we need in this country. So I'll give you one more shout out at the end just to remind you, top.org.nz, become a member. All right. With that having said that, let's move on to question number, what are we at now? 11, I think.
Great questions, by the way, I have to say, really good.
It's a big if. But if Top hit 5% and could play some form of kingmaker, what are your non-negotiable policies to form a coalition? Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, look, I mean, these are kind of very hypothetical questions because you just don't know. And we saw with Winston in 2017, it's always hard to predict. I think if I could say our key policies are around the tax switch, you know, because if we don't deal with the housing issue, it's either going to end in massive tears or it's just going to keep getting worse and worse. So it's not a good outcome. So I think tax reform is a non-negotiable. And David Parker, if you're listening, it's a non-negotiable, you know. So I think the problem Labour's got, it's almost like they've given up thinking about stuff. So I mean, they did this with the rent controls. I think Poto Williams mentioned the issue of rent controls, and then the Prime Minister came out and said, oh, we're not thinking about rent controls, we're not looking at rent controls don't exist, Poto Williams is a mirage. You know, it's like this kind of thought control. And then when David Parker gave his tax speech a couple of weeks ago, the first thing he said is that Labour was not considering any new taxes at all. They weren't even thinking about them. They weren't doing work on them. It's like those taxes don't exist. And then he even added that the IRD was doing no work on it. And I'm thinking, that's lame. That's totally lame. It's like, you should be doing work on it. You should always be doing work on it. And then you can be saying, well, we're not going to do this. But and I think, you know, the media are responsible for this, I have to say, because they ask ridiculous questions and they try and do kind of gotcha stuff. Will you commit to this? Won't you commit to this? And it's almost like the media, which is supposed to be, well, reporting, but you could say encouraging debate, do their best to kind of shut it down by actually, you know, making politicians feel bad about thinking about things because they know the headline's going to be this, and then the opposition's going to go, oh, look, they're thinking about new taxes. Well, so what? You know, thinking, that's kind of what we're supposed to be doing. And the idea that we're going to switch off. Well, get rid of all of them then. You don't need them if you're not going to do any thinking. Why are you spending all that money? So
That's true. You would really hope that the people making decision level.
In terms of, forming a coalition, I mean, who knows what the structure of that would look like? And I spent a lot of time thinking about this in 2017, because there were times when, if I had won Ireland, potentially it could have been a hung parliament. And there was this whole debate about whether Ireland would cause an overhang or an underhang. And actually, people didn't know. They were kind of arguing about it and then going back and going, actually, what happens if this happens, and all the rest of it. And there was a time when there was a poll done, which wasn't released, but I had access to it, which showed me just 8 points behind Jerry at one point. And then everyone thought, crikey, if Raf does win Ireland, that's going to cause a real drama. So I would say, I think it was Hamish, look, I mean, yeah, the tax reform is absolutely key. But, if no one's going to agree with us, we'll just go and sit on the crossbenches. And work from there.
Yeah. All right. Let's have another question, please. Could you explain the UBI ins and outs to someone that is completely new to the concept?
So essentially, it's superannuation that starts at 18. That's it.
Sounds very simple.
Everyone gets it. Now, the interesting thing about this, and I think this might be reflected in the way we approach this, that actually there are quite limited numbers of people who are not either in work or receiving some form of welfare. It's actually a tiny number. So it's essentially primary caregivers. It's people who are caregiving at home, who have no income at all. Now, those are the people we want to bring in, if you like, to the welfare system. So the UBI would bring in those people. But for the UBI, in a way, it just eliminates administration. It gets rid of all the nonsense sanctions, like what's your relationship status? Do you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend or whatever? It's like, who cares? It's just all of that stuff will disappear.
Yeah. I find that stuff very, very hard to swallow, honestly. The amount of intrusiveness that the government has into your personal life when you're in that kind of situation. It's frankly, it's disgusting.
Yeah, and it goes back actually to one of those early questions about top being called communist. It's actually, we're completely anti that. We want kind of the state out of your lives, but we want the public support for all of us. And we want a system where at least everyone has the basics so that they can get on with whatever they need to do. And you get rid of all the abatements as well. So the marginal tax, out the door. So that's really the critical pieces. It's superannuation starting at 18.
But Raf, I hear people asking, isn't that a lot of money? How could we afford all of this money?
Yeah, because there's two ways the two ways we would fund it. One is through the land tax, and the other is through flattening the tax system. So everyone pays the same rate of tax. Now, what that does, it delivers huge income tax cuts to those who are in work, as well as those who are actually on welfare at the moment. And you end up with let's say, not paying any tax until about $40,000-$45,000. So there's lots of ways of doing it. And I'm not saying we will, end up with that position in the end. And certainly through negotiations, it might be different. But that's the impulse, absolutely. Yeah. And look, I mean, I'll give you a quick example. I was at a dinner in Christchurch recently, and there was a woman there who worked for WINS. She was a social worker. And she said, I'm voting top next time. And I go, why is that? And she goes, because I'm really tired of our welfare system. It is so demeaning to people. And she's working in it. And it's so frustrating. You have to remember, it's frustrating for the people who work in that system and are trying to support people, because they're the ones who have to give you the bad news and say, can you fill out this form? Can you fill out that form? What's your address? Who are you sleeping with? Yada, yada. I mean, it's just, they don't like it either. They want to actually be trying to support people positively, not negatively.
Yeah. I think I remember around the 2020 election when we did the numbers for that, somebody who was working a full-time minimum wage job with everything all up, the UBI, the flat tax and everything else, they ended up being about $3,000 better off every year. So this is a tax switch which is going to be hugely beneficial for workers, in my opinion, anyway.
Think about, national in whenever, I think 2013, 2014, they raised GST, but they cut income tax.
Yeah.
So essentially, what we'll be doing will be similar, cutting income taxes, and we'll be raising revenue on land.
All right, another quick plug here. We're asking all members and everybody who's interested, if you want to support Top, one of the really good ways to do that is to donate money to our cause. We need to pay for people who are doing the wonderful stuff like making all the technology work for us tonight. We need to pay for getting people out there, for printing, all sorts of costs that a political party has. You can definitely help us if you donate some more money. It is going to a good cause and we really can use the help. So pop along to top.org.nz/donate. All right, end of the plug. I think we've got time for a couple more questions. Let's see one more. How does someone put their name forward to run in the election in 2023 under Top for an electorate?
Thank you, Vincent. That's a good question, because we're just about to put up on the website an expression of interest form, which will allow people who are interested in doing this to get in touch with us. We're not going to require too much information. You can just have a general conversation. You can call up and just say, hey, what's involved? This is where I live. This is why I'd like to get involved. What's the process? What's the next step? So we're starting off with a kind of soft call for interest. And yeah, so if you're interested in being a candidate, just get in touch with us. Name, where you live, CV, a little bit about yourself, and that's it. And we'll arrange a time to have a chat and take it from there. And yeah, and we welcome people getting in touch with us. This is a people-based party, so we want representation that's very wide and broad. And yeah, it'd be really great to hear from you.
All right, next question, please. So all of you out there who are thinking about it, send the word, send an expression of interest in. We'd love to hear from you. What does Top think of fair pay agreements as a policy?
Yeah, look, we're fairly neutral on this. I mean, I spoke to Business New Zealand recently. Obviously, there's the social insurance scheme, fair pay. I think, and actually Jeff is a bit of an expert on this, Jeff Simmons. He's actually working in that space at the moment. He seemed to think if it involved extra training, he thought it was reasonable, but it's not something that we would die in a ditch on. I'm quite happy for the unions and Business New Zealand to try and sort it out. The concept of fair pay, like, who could disagree with that? I think for businesses, it's more about the contractual negotiations and setting pay scales and all the rest of it. So yeah, it's not something that is a huge focus for us, but we'll keep a watching eye on it.
All right. And I think we've got time for about one more question before we head up to 8 o'clock. So let's bring another one on. All right, what can we as supporters and members do to improve the visibility of Top in the mainstream media? Are we largely limited to word of mouth support?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, that's a great question, Caroline. I think both and. I mean, in terms of where people get their information from these days, there's some people are still watching One News. A lot of people are on TikTok and Instagram and social media. So social media is important these days. And there are some people, I see them, who mention on Facebook in conversations about, national labor. Hey, why don't you have a look at Top? That's very helpful. Word of mouth is key as well. And I think also the public meetings are important as well. So, last month I did a few. I've got to go away shortly to deal with elderly parents overseas. But when I come back, I'll be doing more road trips. So anybody who thinks they would like a meeting in their town or city, or is happy to host one, then buy a t-shirt. Yeah, that's good. I mean, I think we have to also realize, and I mean, I'm not panicking about this at all. A lot of other people are, is we've got quite a long runway into this election. And to give you an example, when I ran in 2017 in Ireland, I ran a 7-week campaign and still got nearly 24% of the vote. So I'm actually very comfortable about the time that we've got. And, as the team knows, we've got a very clear calendar. We've got a very clear plan about how we intend to approach this. But really, talking to people, if you want me to come and talk to people, I will come and talk to them. If you want me to hop on a Zoom call, I'm happy to do that as well. So yeah, we're just going to build. What are we now? We're May. Yeah, in a year's time. Yeah, I mean, we need to be front and center and ready to fight the campaign. And I'm really looking forward to that. So yeah, just keep talking to people. If you're around social media, yeah, just, like our stuff, retweet it, whatever, and that all helps.
Yeah, I think one thing that's key is that don't discount the power of your word of mouth either. It ultimately, at the end of the day, it is a very effective way to get our name out there, to let people know that people are thinking about Top. Like, have you, as a supporter of Top, actually told everybody in your life, "Hey, I like the Opportunities Party. I'm really interested in what they're saying. I think you should have a look too." I think even just something as small as that, it makes people think, "Oh, maybe they do have a point. Maybe I should look at them." Everybody in your life needs to know that you like the Opportunities Party, and the best way for you to do that is just to tell them face to face. I tell you, it gets results.
And talk about it. Yeah. So let's have one last question then. I'll rattle through it in the 60 seconds.
One more? Okay, we'll do one more and then we'll wrap up. This will be a speed round question, Raf.
Oh.
Will the Warriors make 8 this year?
Look, I hope, I love the Warriors, but by golly, I've never seen a team that throws away so many matches. So I don't know what the hell's going on. But there's somebody on Twitter who has invited me to a Warriors game. I think probably next time they play at home, sometime in July, August. So I will be there, and we'll be supporting them. Yes. So look out for me. I'll be wearing a Top T-shirt.
You better.
Well, I hope so. I think, if they get some focus, they've certainly got the skill to do it.
All right, there you go. They can do it. They can make the top 8. You heard it here first, folks. Raf, thank you so much for your time. And to all of you who've been tuning in, I really appreciate you coming in here as well to learn about Top. Go and share the word. We're a great party. We are going to change the country for the better. And it all comes down to you people out there. So get out there, talk to people in your life, wave to Raf when you see him passing in the street. Wear your Top T-shirts. There's lots of ways you can be supporting the party right now. And look, as I say as a young person, I'm 34 now, almost 35. I mean, I still think of myself that way, but I guess I've got to admit that I'm sort of on the precipice now. It's so important to me and to the people in my life that young people in this country have a reasonable expectation that they can live and have a future in this country, that they can work a job, they can have a house and a family. And just about nobody that I know of my age or younger really genuinely believes that about New Zealand right now. And that is just heartbreaking. A lot of change to be made, but it can be made. Have a bit of courage, have a bit of hope, and we'll be able to get there.
Thank you, Ben. That's wonderful words. And thanks for hosting me this evening.
Oh, a pleasure, Raf. Anytime. Always happy to host you. All right. So I think that's it from us. Ka kite anō. And do we know when we're going to have the next one of these?
Probably in, hopefully, a month. I may be coming to you from Spain, but that'll be fine.
Right. About 1 month's time, we probably have another one of these. So stay tuned. Look out for that. It'll be advertised on our Facebook page, on our Twitter, on our social media platforms. Yeah. What else do you say?
Just good night and God bless.
And God bless. Thank you all. Ka kite.
Ciao.